The Cusumano Bros return, both of us. It's the Money Stop, presented by Kicking the Tires. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. And Cole, first and foremost, got to give you some props on a great episode, great analysis last week at Martinsville. And thank you for kind of pinch hitting twice already this season after I had two really busy weeks, one at spring training, one opening weekend for the MLB or MILB season. So I don't expect many more weekends that I won't be unavailable, but just one of those times where it's the craziest time of year. And for me, that craziest time of year is over. But let's get into it, Cole. It's the Money Stop. It's your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. And as I mentioned before, you had some great analysis on one of our favorite tracks. I would say personally, it may be my favorite track, Martinsville. And we had a really fun competitive race. How about that performance by Hendrick Motorsports on the anniversary of the 40th win for Rick Hendrick? William Byron, who else to get the milestone victory in the first ever 1-2-3 finish for any team at Martinsville? It was one of those kind of storybook feeling races where we've seen it a lot of times with Hendrick Motorsports, man. With these milestones, you mentioned it in the episode, there just seems to be some kind of a magic in the air, whether it's, I remember the 200 win at Darlington at the Southern 500 like it was yesterday. The Chase Elliott Championship and Jimmy Johnson's last race. There's just whatever it is, there's just a knack for these moments when it comes to Hendrick Motorsports. And man, William Byron has done it again.
Yeah, and I had a feeling, because Joe Gibbs Racing was obviously the talk of the town. Leaving out of Richmond, Denny Hamlin got the win. Truex led the entire race pretty much. But yeah, I think HMS and just honestly teams and drivers in general, when there's a big moment ensuing for that typical race week or that specific race weekend, they rise to the occasion, and that was definitely the case once again with Hendrick Motorsports, as you mentioned, going 1-2-3 at Martinsville, and in a race where I feel like not a whole lot happened. I think you look at the short tracks we've had this year. I think Bristol was obviously the best so far, and that was due to an error, honestly, on Goodyear's part in bringing a tire that simply put down too much rubber. But at this point in time, seeing the product that was on display in the other Virginia track in Martinsville, I think it's becoming more apparent now that this is what you're going to have with the next-gen car at short tracks. And there's not going to be a simple fix. There's not going to be a quick fix in regard to the package. If you want to have competitive racing and, I guess, racing that's pleasing to the eye from viewers at home, you got to do something with the tires. Goodyear's going to be the biggest difference maker. Whether you're limiting sets or bringing a new tire to the track that puts down more rubber like Bristol, I think that needs to be the case going forward for all short tracks because this, I think it was competitive enough, but I think for the general masses, it definitely was not a race that was enjoyed widely. So overall, I think it was a fine race. I think it was a typical short track race in the next-gen car, but nonetheless, gigantic race for the HMS stable. Again, hats off to William Byron and the entire organization on a huge milestone win on their 40th anniversary race. And just, again, want to pat myself on the back here because of the top 10 drivers from Martinsville, we got 6 of those in the top 10 of the 12 we mentioned. So really, really good day. My race winner pick, Chase Elliott, wound up third, but also had a really good shot at the win in this race. And I thought for a good portion of it that he might have walked away the winner for the first time since 2022.
Well, you're right, Cole. I mean, to fix the short track racing in this package, the next gen car, you almost have to handicap the drivers. It feels bad to say, but that's pretty much the fix that needs to be had. You have to make it harder on them, like you said, whether that be with the tire or some other kind of variable that would make racing more difficult. That's the only way to improve the competitiveness. I thought for what it was, like you pretty much summarized it well, but for what it was, and the fact there wasn't a ton of passing, I thought the third stage was entertaining. Like you said, there was a chance where it looked like Chase might win. Byron pretty much came out of nowhere to win it. And then, like you said, the Toyotas were fast again. That's my other really big takeaway is that the Fords are pretty much still nowhere to be found. There's signs of life, it feels like every week, but in terms of really, truly contending for a win, leading laps, that's really my big takeaway. I'm not putting a lot of trust in the Fords at all until I got to see it to believe it, basically.
That's a really good way of looking at it. Yeah, completely agree.
Well, let's run down this top 10, Cole. Mentioned that top three of Hendrick Motorsports: William Byron, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson. Larson second, Elliott third. By the way, before we proceed, Cole, can you believe Kyle Larson posting the second fastest lap in Indy 500 open testing, and he's never been in one of those cars before?
I'll tell you what, I really think he's going to be a player in that race, and I cannot wait for that double. It is going to be something to see.
I'm so excited. Anyway, fourth place was Bubba Wallace, and he was very strong all day. Ryan Blaney fifth, I think really pretty much continues to be the strongest forward. Joey Logano sixth, had a strong race. Tyler Reddick seventh. Alex Bowman, the fourth of four Hendrick Chevys, was eighth. Ryan Preece, a strong day in ninth, so he continues to be a player at the short tracks. And then Chase Briscoe rounded out the top 10. So again, I feel like we summarized it pretty well. I think that for a fourth straight season doing this podcast, these short tracks are going to be pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward, and from a odds making and betting sense, that bodes well for those of you who are listening to this podcast. So, very predictable, like you mentioned. Six of the drivers that you mentioned finished in the top 10 there. So, before we proceed any further, Cole, I want to talk some paint schemes because our nickel or dime segment, if you listen to the first three seasons of this podcast, was here on the airwaves, but being that it's very visual, and we wanted to make a little bit more room for actual betting analysis and different types of bets that we go over. That's now on social media. So keep it tuned at @the_money_stop and let us know your favorite paint schemes and your least favorite paint schemes, your nickels and your dimes every week. But Cole, we are heading now to Texas, and these intermediate tracks have pretty much been the bread and butter of this next gen car era. So I love Texas. I think this is pretty much for me. It's always been one of my favorite mile-and-a-half tracks. Maybe for bias, maybe for not. Obviously, growing up a big Jimmy Johnson fan, this was always one of his best tracks. I'm particularly excited that his 84 Toyota will be on the track this week. We'll see how things go. He's had just, it feels like horrific fortune in all of his kind of spot starts since retiring from full-time racing. So I'm not getting my hopes up, but that's kind of where my head is at this week. As we head to Texas, we're going to find out the starting lineup this Saturday, 11:20 Eastern time for this race. And before we proceed any further, Cole, let's take it to the bank. Let's look at our pre-qualifying odds per BetMGM. And it's going to lead off with another Hendrick Chevy. Kyle Larson, plus 425 for the win. Then you got some Toyotas. Denny Hamlin, plus 650. Tyler Reddick and William Byron tied at plus 700, followed by Ryan Blaney at plus 1,000 to round out the top five in odds pre-qualifying per BetMGM, Cole. So I think that there's a clear favorite in my head in terms of the driver that's won three races this year. That's William Byron. There's a clear, probably second favorite. That's Denny Hamlin. Those are the two drivers I'm going to mention. But before I dive into them, why don't you hit it off with your favorites this week?
All right, so my favorite going into this week at Texas is going to be our runner-up from last week in Kyle Larson, who is once again valued at plus 425, and a steep $11,000 for DFS, which is the most expensive driver in the garage, and for good reason. Kyle Larson is riding back-to-back podium finishes. That runner-up marked his fourth top five of the season, which ties him for the most in the series with Ryan Blaney. And that also accumulates to a 10.6 average finish, which is the third best in the garage area, and also vaulting him as the points leader at this point in time through 8 races in the season. And what I found really interesting coming out of Texas was some comments Kyle Larson made to the media about how he felt that this was his most consistent season ever in the Cup Series. And just going through the numbers, it definitely is. And that's a very scary thing for the rest of the field, because you look at the first 2 years, the next-gen car, he had 3 top fives and a win in 2022 and 2023. The first season with the next-gen car, he had a 19th place average. Bump that up to a 16.7 average, I believe it was, last year through 8 races. Then you go back to 2021, his championship winning season. 4 top fives, 1 win, and an 11th place average. Those are almost identical numbers to this year with 4 top fives, a win, but a slightly better 10.6 average. So I think in saying this is his most consistent year to date is on the money, and it's a very scary thing for the rest of the field because, I mean, obviously all the talks on William Byron, and rightfully so, getting those first 3 wins of the season and being the winningest driver in the next-gen era, but we cannot forget how talented and how great of a driver Kyle Larson truly is, and I really think we're going to see that once again on display as we get into these warm summer months because, I mean, just speaking outside of the NASCAR stuff, As the months heat up, the days heat up, they get longer. You're going into more sprint car racing. Obviously, he's back on track testing for Indy. That's coming up. And I think once he gets extra seat time, that speed's contagious. And we see it time and time again. We call every summer the summer of Kyle Larson. I think it'll be even more so in 2024. But looking at Texas, he has the most laps led there in the next gen era. He has a ninth place finish in the first start there and a 31st place finish last year. However, in that race, he wrecked on a restart with 20 to go from second place, battling for the lead with Bubba Wallace. So, by no means indicative of how he ran that race. Can't forget that he also swept the on-track festivities in 2021 at Texas, winning the Cup race and the All-Star race. And also cannot forget that he dominated and won the Vegas race earlier this year. And that is so far the only traditional mile-and-a-half track that we've run in 2024. So I love Kyle Larson this week. I think he's really going to go on a tear here. And he, I think, is my favorite and Vegas' favorite for the reason. My other favorite going into this race is going to be one of the 2311 cars in Tyler Reddick, who is plus 700 for the race win and $1,000 cheaper than Kyle Larson for DFS at $10,000. And Tyler Reddick is riding a 3-race top 10 streak in 2024. Just now, finally feels like he's hitting his stride. That 7th place finish at Martinsville was 5th top 10 of the season, which is also tied for the most in the series at this point through 8 races. That includes a runner-up at Vegas, which again, as just mentioned with Kyle Larson, has been the only traditional mile-and-a-half track this year. And had there been one more lap, Reddick probably would have won that race. But looking at Texas, he won the first next-gen race there. He has over 100 laps led between both next-gen starts, and that includes one runner-up as well in his career here, with a 10.6 average finish in 5 starts in the Cup Series at Texas. Looking at his Xfinity career there as well, also got 1 win and 2 runner-ups there. So this is definitely a track where that team and that driver knows how to get around. We talked about it all year, last year pretty much, how that organization in 2311 was really, really good, pretty much the top in class at the mile-and-a-half tracks, intermediate tracks, and I expect that to be the same going into Texas.
And starting on the topic of Kyle Larson, we've pretty much just been to one traditional intermediate track this year, and it was Vegas, and it was won by Kyle Larson. So it wouldn't be a surprise to see him in victory lane once again. And Tyler Reddick finished second in that race. So those two favorites are very well put. I think that they're there for a reason. And this is one of those weeks, Cole, where I honestly would be surprised if our race winner does not come from this bracket of drivers that we're mentioning. So you mentioned Larson, you mentioned Reddick. I'm going to mention the 2 winningest drivers in the garage, which is why I mentioned they're my 2 favorites, and that's William Byron. And I continue to talk about his versatility. He's now won at a super speedway. He has won on a road course. He has run a short track. He's got to get that final Infinity Stone and win at an intermediate track, and we're only in race number 9. So he is plus 700 for the win, 10,800 daily fantasy, first 3-time race winner of the season. He won the last race at Texas in the playoffs, so he's done it before. He's done it recently. He is one of only 4 drivers with top 10s in both next-gen starts at Texas. So he's done it in this era, led laps in the last 3 Texas races, top 7 in all 3 of those starts. And he's led laps in all but 2 of 9 starts at Texas in his Cup career, even spanning beyond the next-gen era. So William Byron has been the best driver this year. He's been one of the best drivers at Texas in his career and especially in the next-gen era. So you mentioned a couple short bets there with Reddick and Larson. William Byron, certainly a sure bet this week. And I mentioned the second winningest driver in the garage this year. The only other 2-time race winner is Denny Hamlin. Plus 650 for the race win this week, 10,500 in daily fantasy. So a little bit cheaper on the DraftKings side of things, a little bit more expensive on the BetMGM side of things. But when he's not winning, he's finishing top 15 this year, specifically 11th. Case in point, he didn't win last week, finished 11th at Martinsville. He's got an 11th place average finish this year in 2024, which ranks 4th in the garage. He finished 8th at Vegas, which was the only other traditional mile-and-a-half track I mentioned before. And only top 10 outside of his wins was that one at Vegas. So he's been consistent, a top 11, top 10 car, whatever you want to call it. And for Denny, he's a 3-time race winner at Texas. He last won there, however, in 2019. Top 10s in both next-gen car starts at Texas. So I like Denny Hamlin this week. I would say I like him less than the other 3 drivers that we mentioned in Larson, Reddick, and Byron. but Denny has established himself as one of the best drivers in the garage this season, and I am riding the hot hand until proven otherwise.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I would be very surprised if the winner of this race did not come from these four drivers in our favorites category. And I also agree in saying that Denny's probably my least favorite of these four drivers. I think as a value for DFS and just honestly a race winner in general, I think obviously it's going to be hard to get Kyle Larson in there being the most expensive driver at $11,000, but I think he's that value for a good reason. And should you be able to fit him into your lineup, I think it would pay off immensely for you. I think Tyler Reddick, valued $1,000 less at $10,000, is a really, really smoking value given his history and recency at Texas. And then, yeah, William Byron, just a smidge cheaper than Kyle Larson. I would probably lean towards starting him over or Larson over Byron if you were to consider those two for DFS, just because, I mean, it's only $200 extra for someone who's proven to be at the top of his game right now and at Texas. So I think, again, very, very well-rounded favorites category, and I think we have a really good set of sleepers coming up here as well.
Good set of sleepers. So I'm going to keep it cold. I'll kick this one off. I'm going to keep this in the Toyota and Chevy camp with a couple of drivers that are pretty hot entering this week. Specifically, one of them. I'll start with Chase Elliott because you mentioned it was obviously an extremely disappointing season last year, and he came as close to a win at Martinsville as he has in basically 2 years. He is plus 1,800 for the win this week, which is honestly a pretty solid value considering how hot he has been, and 9,300 in daily fantasy. And he's riding back-to-back top fives for the first time since the end of June last year. So it's a hot Chase Elliott is a scary thing for the garage. If he really starts to regain his footing and, string these results together, you're talking about a former champion here. And, it's kind of the breakout that I think a lot of people were expecting at some point last year, but it's been postponed until what I think is now, because I think the breakout is fully on for Chase Elliott. He's coming off a season best third. I mentioned that other race at Vegas, the traditional mile and a half. He finished 12th there at Texas in the next gen era. Hasn't been too kind to Chase, finished 13th there and then 32nd the last time, but he did lead laps in both starts and got top 10s in just under half his starts at Texas out of the 13 and a 13.1 average. So he's been a little bit hit or miss at this particular track, but you know how I am, Cole. I like to play the hot hand. Definitely believer in momentum. It's a very real thing in sports, in life, especially in NASCAR. And I really feel that Chase Elliott is going to ride the momentum wave into Texas and put up another top five finish. As for another Toyota I've teased, that is Christopher Bell. He is plus 1,200 for the race win, 9,500 in daily fantasy. And I mentioned he's hot. I guess you can just exclude the last race because prior to Martinsville, he had a four-race top 10 streak going. And obviously ran into trouble, but he finished fourth in the last race at Texas. That was, of course, during the playoffs when Seabell is at his best. But he's got some good notes at this track. He's got top fives and 3 out of 5 starts at Texas. However, he has only led 5 laps there. So Seabell is one of the kind of, I would say, like under the radar drivers here, where you look at the stats, you look at his history at Texas, his resume this year. He's not one of the first guys you look at, like a Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick, but he's one of those guys that is kind of lurking, and I can definitely see this being a breakout race for him at Texas.
Could not agree more. Someone I'm looking at as a really legitimate sleeper for this win is going to be Bubba Wallace, valued at plus 1,400 for the race win and $8,700 for DFS. Coming off his third top 5 of the season in 2024 at Martinsville in a really, really good race for that team. He was, I would definitely say, the best car outside the Hendrick stable in that race. And as we always talk about, whenever we bring up Bubba Wallace, he's a very temperamental driver. Momentum is a very real thing for that driver and that team, and I think right now you're seeing him really round into form. He finished third at Texas in 2023 after leading the most laps in that race. Started from the pole, led the most laps, and was firmly in contention for that win up until Kyle Larson wrecked on that restart with him, but 20 to go. And then again, I mentioned it with Tyler Reddick, 2311's prowess on the mile and a half tracks in the next-gen era. That extends to Bubba Wallace as well. 5 top 10s in the 7 traditional mile and a half races last year, 4 of those being top 5. So he was extremely, extremely successful on those style of tracks in 2023. We're seeing him round into shape in 2024 at this point in the season. 3 top fives through 8 races is really impressive. That's only one less than Kyle Larson's series best at 4. So I think that team's come to play, and I look for him to be a strong contender once again here at Texas. And then we have not mentioned a Ford yet this episode, so I'm going to start doing that right now with Brad Keselowski, who is plus 2,500 for the race win and $8,200 for DFS, and someone who's looking for consistency. But I will say, though, all 3 of his top 10s in 2024 have come over the last 5 weeks. His best finish outside of those top 10s the last 5 weeks was 13th at Las Vegas. And speaking on Texas, though, he has a 5-race top 10 streak going there, which is the longest in the garage area. He finished 7th there in 2023, 8th in 2022 after starting from the pole. So this is definitely a driver that knows how to get around Texas. I think, obviously, Brad's had his struggles since making the transition over to his new team in RFK Racing, but it seems like those tracks where he is good at historically, he tends to remain good there regardless. Talking about your Talladegas, Daytonas, which are obviously, a thing of their own, but I think you look at Texas as a place where he stood the test of time. 5-race top 10 streak is not easy to do anywhere, but especially for a track where passing is very difficult, aerodynamics come into play. I think that this will be a really, really big race for that Ford stable and Brad Keselowski's team, because they have shown they can be a top 10 car. It's just a matter of stringing those runs together on a weekly basis. And I look for this to be a really good race for that team. Again, 5 straight top 10s is the longest in the garage area, and would not be surprised to see that team contend for a top 5 on Sunday.
Yeah, if you're looking for a Ford, I mean, that the numbers don't lie. And that's why we do these episodes usually before the cars hit the track for practice and qualifying, because you read a little deeper into those numbers, and a 5-race top 10 streak at Texas is certainly not a fluke for Brad Keselowski, and I'm a fan of Bubba Wallace in that pick as well. But those are our sleepers, Cole, kicking off that bracket. Let's move on to our value picks. You could argue that sometimes the sleepers are values, but I think that, again, this year we're going for deep dives with our value picks this year, and there are a few basement bargains this week, I'll say. And the first of those, as I kick this one off, has got to be Justin Haley. And he's valued at only 5,300 in daily fantasy, which is a lot of times what we're going for with these value picks is their fantasy value. But Justin Haley also is plus 8,000, I believe, for the race win. Double checking that. I'm sorry, he's plus 8,000 for top 5. He's plus 7,000 for the race win, plus 1,300 for a top 10. So a value any way you slice it. He has the 3rd best average finish at Texas in the next gen era at 2 races, an 8th place average finish. That's a 3rd and a 13th. So Justin Haley is a really good deep reach. And he's been one of our DFS dough-getters this year. No finish better than 30th in the last 3 weeks, but he has been a DFS darling these past, whenever we've looked at him at tracks like this, he has been really a guy to keep an eye on. And for Justin Haley, he's another one of those guys, Cole. It's like you mentioned with Brad. Historically, there's tracks he's good at, and regardless of the team change, he's put up the results at those tracks. I feel like you can say the same about Justin Haley. There's certain tracks he's good at that he has stood the test of time and transitioning to different teams, and he still performs well at those tracks. So at 5,300 in daily fantasy for Justin Haley and at plus 1,300 for a top 10, sign me up. Another sleeper, Cole, is one of our former race winner season. He's a sleeper, but he's in the value picks bracket for this reason. Daniel Suarez, valued at 7,200 this week. He has no finish better than 22nd the last 3 weeks. So this is a very under-the-radar value pick. But, he had the win at Atlanta, of course, which was an untraditional 1.5-mile track. And his best finish outside of that was at Vegas. It was an 11th place. And in the next-gen era at Texas, he's got finishes of 12th and 8th, 3-race top 13 streak with a pair of top 10s at Texas, and a 10th place average in the next-gen era. So relative to the rest of Suarez's stats the last couple of seasons at various tracks, various seasons, Texas has stood the test of time for him, and we've already seen the win under his belt this year. So Daniel Suarez, very solid value pick at 7,200 DFS. Justin Haley, I would say borderline lock DFS pick at 5,300 based on how the rest of your lineup is breaking out.
All right. Now, you mentioned it with Justin Haley. I mentioned it with Brad Keselowski. When there are certain drivers that are proven and tested to be good at a certain track, you've got to go with them. And I'm looking at 2 drivers in that vein. The first driver I'm going to mention, Eric Jones, is the epitome of that statement. valued at $7,000 this weekend for DFS. When he is good at a certain track, it does not matter what he's driving. It does not matter how he's running at that point in time. He is almost a sure thing to run well in that race and contend for a top 10 finish. And I'll even say score a top 10 finish. So I'm looking at him this week because he has some really impressive stats at Texas, but he also has a bit of momentum on his side in 2024 as well, riding back-to-back top 15s after finishing 12th at Martinsville, which is his best finish since the season opener at Daytona, actually. So definitely looking up for that 43 bunch. His 7th top 10 at Texas came in his next-gen debut. He did finish 30th last year after a late race crash, but he did have an average running position of 9th in this race, which was one of only a couple races where he had an average running position inside the top 10. So in the next-gen car, definitely been a top 10 contender at Texas. Also led laps in both his next-gen starts there. And his 11.8 average finish in the series is the 3rd best overall technically. However, it is the best overall among drivers with 10-plus starts. So Eric Jones, very under-the-radar pick, but someone who has proven to be a really, really consistent driver at Texas. And then the final driver I'm going to mention is the driver I was very high on last week at Martinsville. And this is a driver that when we bring him up in the value picks category, your ears need to perk up because he has not proven us wrong once, I don't think. And that's going to be Chase Briscoe, valued at $7,700, who scored his 3rd top 10 of the season last week at Martinsville. But looking at Texas, he has a 10th place average finish through 3 starts. I know it's a very small sample size, but nonetheless, a 10th place average is really, really good no matter what. He has a lowest finish of 15th, finished 5th in his next-gen debut, and finished 10th last year. So really, really solid, really, really consistent, and also one of those 4 aforementioned drivers with top 10s in both next-gen starts. He was also in that same air last week in Martinsville, one of only 3 drivers, I believe it was, to have top 10s in all 4 starts at Martinsville in the next-gen car. So I think that trend will definitely follow into Texas, where, as we've seen pretty much all season great races, they've been one of the strongest Ford teams all season. And also, just speaking on Texas once again for Chase Briscoe, his 7.5 average finish is tied for the 2nd best in the garage area at this point in time. So looking at Eric Jones, looking at Chase Briscoe, 2 drivers who I feel are going to be really, really strong top 10 contenders at Texas.
Yeah, I think of Chase Briscoe as another one of those guys, Cole, that has kind of carried the flag for Ford this year. Like you think of RFK, Brad has certainly been a guy that's, been faster than most of the Fords in the Penske stable. Joey and Blaney, they've had their weeks, but Chase Briscoe, in terms of that Stewart-Haas Racing camp, has been one of, like you said, the more consistent Fords. And we go to a track now that has been kind to him, and he has this tied for the 2nd best average finish in this era. It bodes well for Chase Briscoe and the Fords this week. So that's our 12 drivers. Let's get this down to 6, Cole. We each like to pick 1 per tier. I'm going to pick William Byron from the favorites tier. I will take Chase Elliott from the sleepers tier, and I will take Justin Haley as the value pick.
Sweet. I'm going to go with a driver from each manufacturer for my 3 drivers. For my favorites, it's going to be Kyle Larson. My sleeper is going to be Bubba Wallace, and then my value pick is going to be Chase Briscoe.
On to our next segment, Cole. Let's talk about some big money bets. These are our favorite prop bets of the week where, you might feel apprehensive to throw $20 on a race winner, but you could feel pretty good about throwing $20 on a certain prop bet, like a top 5 or top 10. So you've got some pretty good ones listed here. Why don't you kick us off?
Awesome. Yeah, so I have 6 listed here, 3 from BetMGM and 3 from DraftKings. I wanted to start off by saying, typically, BetMGM has the best values for race winners and prop bets. However, I have found that DraftKings has better odds for top 10 finishers, and they also have more variety for bets such as group winners, manufacturer winners, top manufacturer driver. So with that, for BetMGM, my favorite prop bets are going to be Tyler Reddick to finish top 5 at plus 110, Bubba Wallace to finish top 5 at plus 280, and then Chase Briscoe to finish top 10 at plus 225. For DraftKings, they have Brad Keselowski to finish top 10 at plus 100, which I'm not as confident in, I will say, but when you consider the fact that he's finished top 10 in the last 5 races at Texas, It looks like a really, really good value being at even. And then I also we haven't mentioned these group winner bets yet on this podcast, I don't think, but they have some really cool ones. And how it works is it's like a head-to-head bet, except it's one driver ahead of three other drivers. And I like two of those. There's a Group C winner and a Group D winner. For Group C, I chose Bubba Wallace to finish ahead of Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, and Ty Gibbs. And then for Group D, I picked Brad Keselowski to finish ahead of Alex Bowman, Joey Logano, and Chris Buescher. And I believe, with the exception of Chase Elliott in the Group C, we had not mentioned any of those other five drivers. So I like those as big money bets quite a bit, but I will condense that down to one as we put our money where our mouth is here in a few minutes.
So, and you said those groups were on DraftKings, right?
Correct.
That's the cool thing, to just check around the other sports books, see what they're offering. And that's a pretty good one, because one thing we're very consistent with, Cole, is like, we name these 12 drivers. It is extremely rare that we don't have anywhere from 7 to 9 of the top 10 out of the 12 drivers we name. So if we're mentioning guys, not mentioning others, that's something that when you're looking at those group bets, your ears should definitely perk up on. But as far as big money bets, Cole, I'm gonna tell you on a lot of these. I would say my favorite is probably Tyler Reddick at plus 110 to finish in the top five. You could similarly say William Byron at plus 110 in the top five, Kyle Larson at minus 130. But I think just based on value and my confidence level out of those three picks, I like Tyler Reddick at plus 110 is probably my favorite big money bet this week. And as far as top 10s go, you mentioned a couple of those sleepers. I would say my favorite top 10 prop bet this week is probably Chase Briscoe at plus 225. Mentioned the success this year, mentioned the success at Texas. Chase Briscoe plus 225 in the top 10, definitely one that catches my eye. So I mean, I like your other one too. I like Bubba Wallace at plus 280 to be in the top five. So I'm definitely on the same page with you. Rather than picking anything different, I'm going to pretty much double down on those two: Reddick top five, Briscoe top 10, because I'm a big fan of them. And obviously, you said everything that needed to be said on those DraftKings Group C and D pools. Let's talk one last type of bet, Cole. That is our head-to-heads, which are different per sports book. So I'm going to rattle off these BetMGM head-to-head bets, and you let me know if anything sticks out here. There's five that are parlayable with each other or other sports. So you got Kyle Larson versus William Byron, Daniel Suarez versus Brad Keselowski, Ryan Preece versus Chase Briscoe, Bubba Wallace versus Tyler Reddick, and Ryan Blaney versus Chase Elliott.
Out of those five, the only one that I'm really a fan of is Briscoe over Preece. The other ones are all pretty much 50-50, and I would not touch them with a 10-foot pole, to be honest with you.
Yeah, my mind went the same direction. Chase Briscoe over Ryan Preece would seem like a slam dunk. Then the DraftKings ones. You got Martin Truex Jr. versus Christopher Bell. You got Ross Chastain versus Chase Elliott. William Byron versus Ryan Blaney. Ty Gibbs versus Bubba Wallace. And Kyle Larson versus Tyler Reddick.
For those ones, I mean, I like Bell over Truex, but at the same point, we've seen the luck that Bell has had this year. Even in the races where he's done well, he's had some misfortune go his way. So I don't know if I'd be confident enough to bet Bell over Truex, but on paper, I would definitely lean that way. And then outside of that, I think that they're pretty much 50-50. For sure, Wallace over Gibbs, I like a lot as well. Obviously, Ty Gibbs, still some unknowns when dealing with him in the Cup car, because we've seen, obviously, the first couple of races, he was doing extremely well, one of the best drivers in the garage, and now the past 2-3 weeks, pretty much since we started documenting his success, he kind of fell off a little bit. So I would definitely lean Wallace over Gibbs for that one in DraftKings. And by the way, these are actually all available on DraftKings, but the first five you mentioned are only available on BetMGM.
Last thing, Cole, here. Let's talk about daily fantasy. We look at the prices all throughout the episode. We discuss values are in terms of DFS on DraftKings specifically, and we collaborate on a lineup every week. And here's what that lineup looks like. It's comprised of all drivers we've discussed. Not always the case, but usually is the case. First thing I did, Cole, when making this lineup that we collaborated on was start the app and scroll down to Justin Haley, because at 5,300, that budget that you have to work with, it's kind of a no-brainer to include Justin Haley in that, because it lets you afford some really expensive drivers. I think we can both agree the top two picks in our mind this week are Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. So when you're picking Justin Haley at 5,300. I was able to afford Larson and Reddick, who were valued at 11 and 10,000 respectively. And then you're filling this lineup out with some sleepers. So you got Bubba Wallace at 8,700, who has definitely got a shot at a top five. Chase Briscoe at 7,700. We just enlisted a lot of confidence in him. And finally, Daniel Suarez at 7,200 was another one of our favorite values of the week. So but I feel pretty good about this lineup.
I feel great about it, honestly. The fact we were able to fit Kyle Larson in there is huge, and double down on that with Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace, both 2311 cars. I think for sure the winner is going to be one of those three drivers right there. And if they're not, I'd be surprised, but I think either way, they will be the three dominant cars for sure in this race. And then we talked about Justin Haley. I know he doesn't have a finish better than 30th over the last 3 weeks, but law of averages says that should equal out to a pretty solid day in Texas at a place where he's had success in this next-gen car. No finish worse than 13th in that time, those two starts. And yeah, as mentioned, just love Chase Briscoe once again this week. He's proven to be a contender for a top 10 whenever you mention him on these value pick segments. So feel really good about him. And then, yeah, Daniel Suarez. I think it's weird to say having someone like Justin Haley in this lineup, but I think he might be our weakest link a little bit here, just speaking on the inconsistencies and whatnot. But I do feel pretty solid about him, given his success in the next-gen car at Texas, and also just speaking on the fact that he won the last technical mile-and-a-half race this season, and that he has pretty good speed on these style tracks in general. So I want to lock this lineup in here for sure. Kyle Larson, Tyler Reddick, Bubba Wallace, Daniel Suarez, Chase Briscoe, and Justin Haley.
Lock it in. We're going to lock that in. We're also going to lock in each of us our favorite prop bets of the week. I want to just cap that off by saying, like, with Justin Haley, you're picking him and kind of hoping for like a top 20. I think that it's important to mention that, we're not going to lock in any kind of DFS bet until we know what the starting lineup looks like, because place differential points are very important. And contrastly, you're hoping for your two aces there, Larson and Reddick, to start on the front row or in the top five and lead a lot of laps and get a lot of fast laps, which will add to your final score as well. So you're definitely going to want to keep an eye on that before locking in your DFS lineup. But that's what I feel pretty damn good about entering the weekend. But let's each lock in a big money bet, Cole. I'm going to go with my favorite of the week as Tyler Reddick plus 110 in the top five.
I will actually double down on that one. So, yeah, Tyler Reddick top five at plus 110. Lock that in, fire it up, throw a big coin of a change on that, because if we're both putting our confidence Tyler Reddick to finish top five, it'll more than likely come to fruition.
Lock it in. All right. So, Cole, let's talk race winners and sleepers. So this is where we end this episode, having a little fun. We sometimes go with our gut. Sometimes we say a driver that we didn't even mention the entire episode. But to recap last week, obviously I was not on the episode, but I had texted you my pick. My pick was Denny Hamlin for the win and ran strong, but just finished right outside the top 10. And you picked Chase Elliott, who came dangerously close to winning that race. So hats off to you for winning that week. I had that first pick this week, and I got to go with Kyle Larson. Like this week in particular, it just feels right. Again, he won at Vegas. We said everything that needs to be said. Kyle Larson's my pick this week, point blank, period.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. So my pick is definitely not going to be who I think is going to win this race, but I think the next best option for me probably going to be Tyler Reddick. I think he obviously was within a lap of winning at Vegas. He's won this race before in the next-gen car. He has over 100 laps led in the next-gen car at Texas. 10.6 average in 5 starts. Really, really good at this track. Really good in the mile-and-a-half tracks in general in this next-gen car. I will go with him for my winner. And then for my sleeper, we're looking at 15th and down in the odds for BetMGM. That'll be Brad Keselowski and lower. And I will keep it right there. I think Brad Keselowski gets his fourth top 10 of 2024 and sixth straight at Texas this weekend.
Well, I am going to go with the infamous driver we haven't mentioned this episode. For my sleeper, I want to go with Noah Gragson because we mentioned Vegas. I know it's his home track. I know he had a good result there. He placed sixth at Vegas. I know it's his best track. probably. But he just has a knack for these intermediates. And I think we haven't talked about Noah Gragson because the results haven't been there. But if there's a place where I could see him rebounding, I could definitely see it happening this week at Texas because he just does so well at these high speed tracks. We've mentioned the Ford of Chase Briscoe, his teammate, and I think that there's something to be said for a fast teammate at this track. I think that Noah Gregson's a guy that I'm not investing any money in this week, but I have a good gut feeling about him.
That's a good deep dive right there. I did not even think about that fact that he had that really good showing in Vegas. That is a really, really good under the radar pick. And honestly, like I said, I know we didn't mention him this episode, but he's someone that I would even consider for DFS. Obviously, look where he qualifies. I think track position obviously isn't as detrimental at Texas, even though it is difficult to pass here. However, I think that's a really, really sneaky good pick. Good call there.
And by the way, Noah Gragson, I mentioned that Vegas race. He was one of the top DFS points getters in that race because he started 30th and finished sixth. So he picked up 24 place differential points there. So again, keep an eye on where everyone qualifies. But this is an exciting one, Cole. Let's recap, not recap, but let's kind of end this episode, put a conclusion on it by doing something we used to do pretty often in the early seasons of the Money Stop. And that is something we haven't done in a few years, but favorite memories from Texas. I mentioned before how this has always been one of my favorite mile and a half tracks. And I got to start. I think back to Jimmy Johnson winning a playoff race in 2013 with the red paint scheme where he had the blue car with the white racing stripes and won his sixth championship that year. Whenever I come to Texas, you think of the fire, the guns in victory lane, the cowboy hat. It just felt pretty fitting that year in 2013, which was 11 freaking years ago now, to see him win in that dark red car with the white racing stripes. A very unique look for him that for me as a fan, I always think when I think of Texas, that's probably the first race that I think of.
Yeah, I could definitely see how that one jumps out to you. I remember that one for sure too, just speaking on that red Jimmy Johnson lowest paint scheme with the white racing stripes. I'm going to jump 1 year ahead, actually, to the 2014 race, which was also run by Jimmy Johnson in the fall. The infamous playoff race where Brad Keselowski and Jeff Gordon got into each other on one of the late restarts, and there was a massive fight after the race. There was some instigations there with Matt Kenseth and Kevin Harvick, but that one for sure, I think, sticks out to me the most at Texas as the most iconic, and I think for a lot of people as the most iconic at that track and its illustrious history. Just it was such a fun race, and I feel like it might be bad to say, being this is 10 years ago now, but I think that was the last really great Texas race in my opinion. But I will never forget that one, man. That was wild.
And I'm thinking back on this now, Cole. I don't even remember. This might have been 2012, to be honest. That my memory, that just shows how long ago it was, because I think I remember Brad K being a big contender in that race, and he obviously beat Jimmy out for the championship that year, but. Texas, a track that, like you mentioned, it hasn't been the most competitive in recent years. Another thing on a personal note for me, growing up playing the NASCAR video games, this was always one of my favorite tracks to race at for whatever reason. I just always enjoyed it. But it is Texas. It is the Auto Trader Echo Park Automotive 400, Texas, this Sunday, 3:35 p.m. It'll be on Fox. So get your TVs tuned to that. And I'll certainly be watching. We hope you will be too. And we hope you were able to take something from this episode and convert it into some money. So as we put our money where our mouth is, Cole, let's drop the jack on this, the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. Reminder, once again, we do these episodes early. So there's a lot of updates to be had over the weekend with practice and qualifying. So follow at @the_money stop on Twitter and all the other social media channels for the major updates that we'll have, as well as my personal account at Steven_Cusumano and your account at Cole_Cusumano_. So thank you all once again. It's been a great week, and we're hoping to win some more money for you here at Texas. We'll see you next time.